What if I told you that everything you think you know about leprechauns is completely wrong? The tiny green-clad shoemakers obsessed with gold and rainbows that populate modern culture bear almost no resemblance to the terrifying supernatural beings that once haunted the Irish countryside. These weren't cute mascots for breakfast cereal or cheerful symbols of good luck. They were shape-shifting tricksters, master craftsmen with otherworldly powers, and guardians of ancient secrets who could curse your entire bloodline if you crossed them the wrong way. Welcome back to Forgotten Lore, where we dive deep into the shadows of mythology to uncover the true stories behind the legends we think we know. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on a journey through centuries of Irish folklore to discover the real leprechauns. Creatures so complex and fascinating that their true nature has been buried beneath layers of commercialization and cultural misunderstanding. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Irish once feared these beings, how they became connected to hidden treasure, and most importantly, why their story represents one of the most dramatic mythological transformations in human history. But first, we need to travel back to a time when Ireland was a land of ancient magic, where the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of the supernatural was paper thin. The story of leprechauns begins not with gold or rainbows, but with water. Yes, water. The earliest mentions of these creatures in Irish folklore describe them as water spirits, dwelling in lakes, rivers, and coastal areas. The very name leprechaun comes from the Irish Leprechauns, which itself derives from Lushorpan, meaning small body. But this wasn't a reference to their stature alone. It was describing beings whose physical forms were as fluid and changeable as the waters they inhabited. In ancient Irish mythology, these water spirits were part of the Tuatha De Danann, the supernatural race that ruled Ireland before the arrival of the Celts. When the mortal Celts conquered the land, the Tuatha De Danann retreated to the Otherworld, but some remained behind, becoming the Aos Si, the people of the Sida Mounds. The leprechauns were among these holdouts, but they chose a different path than their kin. Instead of retreating to fairy mounds or distant islands, they integrated themselves into human society, becoming the ultimate hidden neighbors. The transformation from water spirit to the leprechaun we recognize today didn't happen overnight. It took centuries of cultural evolution, influenced by waves of invasion, religious change, and social upheaval. During the early medieval period, as Christianity spread across Ireland, many of the old gods and spirits were reimagined as lesser supernatural beings. The leprechauns were no exception, but they adapted in ways that would ensure their survival in human memory. Medieval Irish texts describe leprechauns as master craftsmen, particularly skilled in leatherworking and shoemaking. This wasn't just a random occupation assigned to them by storytellers. In ancient Celtic society, craftsmen held special status, believed to possess magical knowledge passed down through generations. The leprechauns, with their supernatural origins, were seen as the ultimate craftsmen, capable of creating items that were not just expertly made, but imbued with otherworldly properties. The famous clicking sound associated with leprechauns, that rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a cobbler's hammer, wasn't just the sound of work being done. It was a warning, a signal to mortals that they were in the presence of something far more powerful than it appeared. Those who heard the sound and chose to investigate often found themselves caught in elaborate supernatural traps, their lives forever changed by the encounter. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The leprechauns of medieval Ireland weren't the benevolent tinkerers of modern imagination. They were tricksters in the truest sense, beings who delighted in confusing, misleading, and sometimes tormenting humans. Their tricks weren't harmless pranks, they were tests, challenges that revealed the true character of those who encountered them. Fail the test, and you might find yourself cursed with bad luck that would plague your family for generations. Pass it, and you might gain access to knowledge or treasures beyond mortal comprehension. The association between leprechauns and gold emerged from this testing tradition. In Irish folklore, gold wasn't just valuable metal, it was a symbol of incorruptibility and divine favor. The leprechauns were said to guard hoards of this precious metal, but not because they were greedy. They were testing human nature itself. Those who sought the gold out of pure greed would be led on wild chases that ended in humiliation or worse. But those who approached with respect and genuine need might find themselves rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. The famous leprechaun's pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is actually a corrupted version of a much older story about the side of roads, invisible pathways that connected the mortal world to the otherworld. These roads were said to be marked by natural phenomena like rainbows, and leprechauns were their guardians and guides. The pot of gold wasn't sitting at the rainbow's end, it was the reward for successfully navigating the supernatural pathway, a journey that required wisdom, courage, and pure intentions. As we move into the post-medieval period, leprechauns began to appear more frequently in recorded folklore, but their portrayals started to shift dramatically. The Protestant Reformation and subsequent English colonization of Ireland had profound effects on Irish culture and mythology. Many of the old stories were suppressed or altered to fit new religious and social paradigms. The leprechauns, once feared and respected as powerful supernatural beings, began to be portrayed as quaint folk characters, more amusing than threatening. This transformation accelerated during the 18th and 19th centuries, as Ireland faced increasing pressure to conform to British cultural standards. The rich oral tradition that had preserved the true nature of leprechauns for centuries was systematically undermined by education policies that promoted English language and culture over Irish traditions. Many of the deeper, more complex stories about leprechauns were lost during this period, replaced by simplified versions that emphasized their more harmless characteristics. The Irish diaspora of the 19th century played a crucial role in further transforming the leprechaun myth. As millions of Irish immigrants spread across the globe, they carried their stories with them, but these tales evolved to suit new audiences and circumstances. In America particularly, leprechauns became symbols of Irish identity, but in a form that was palatable to non-Irish audiences. The dangerous trickster spirits of old were replaced by charming, if mischievous, little men, whose worst crime was playing harmless pranks. But even as the popular image of leprechauns was being sanitized, traces of their original nature persisted in rural Irish communities. Well into the 20th century, farmers in remote areas would still leave offerings for the leprechauns, not out of affection, but out of fear and respect for their power. These communities remembered that leprechauns were territorial beings who could bless or curse the land depending on how they were treated. The leprechauns were said to have dominion over certain aspects of agriculture and animal husbandry. A farmer who maintained good relations with the local leprechauns might find his crops unusually abundant and his livestock healthy and productive. But those who offended these supernatural guardians could expect drought, disease, and a string of misfortunes that would drive them to ruin. The leprechauns weren't evil, but they were unforgiving to those who showed them disrespect or attempted to exploit them. One of the most fascinating aspects of authentic leprechaun lore is their role as keepers of ancient knowledge. In traditional Irish society, leprechauns were believed to possess secrets that predated human civilization in Ireland. They knew the locations of lost treasures, the healing properties of forgotten herbs, and the true names of places and things that held power. This knowledge made them valuable allies, but also dangerous enemies, as they could use their information to help or harm, depending on their mood and the behavior of those who sought their aid. The leprechauns were also master shapeshifters, capable of taking any form they chose. While they preferred to appear as small, elderly men, they could just as easily manifest as animals, inanimate objects, or even other people. This shape-shifting ability was often used to test the character of mortals, with leprechauns appearing as beggars, lost children, or wounded animals to see how humans would respond. Those who showed kindness and compassion might later discover they had been helping a leprechaun, while those who were cruel or indifferent might find themselves the target of supernatural retribution. The relationship between leprechauns and time was particularly complex in traditional folklore. These beings were said to exist partially outside normal temporal flow, able to see past and future events with equal clarity. This temporal awareness made them valuable as oracles and advisors, but also dangerous to those who sought to use this knowledge for selfish purposes. The leprechauns would often speak in riddles and metaphors, forcing those who consulted them to think carefully about their questions and the implications of the answers they received. As the 20th century progressed, commercial interests began to exploit the leprechaun image more aggressively. The tourism industry in Ireland recognized the marketing potential of these mythical beings, but they needed a version that would appeal to international visitors. The result was the creation of the modern leprechaun stereotype, a diminutive figure in green clothing with a pot of gold and a cheerful disposition. This commercialized leprechaun bore little resemblance to the complex supernatural beings of traditional folklore, but it proved enormously successful in promoting Irish tourism and culture. The commercialization of leprechauns reached its peak in the latter half of the 20th century, with these mythical beings appearing in everything from breakfast cereals to Hollywood movies. Each iteration moved further away from the original folklore, creating a feedback loop where the commercialized image became more real in popular consciousness than the authentic myths that had inspired it. By the end of the century, most people's understanding of leprechauns was based entirely on marketing imagery, rather than genuine Irish tradition. However, this commercialization also had an unexpected positive effect. As scholars and cultural enthusiasts became concerned about the loss of authentic Irish folklore, they began working to preserve and document the original leprechaun stories. Academic institutions, folklore societies, and individual researchers started collecting oral histories and examining historical documents to reconstruct the true nature of these mythical beings. This scholarly work revealed just how drastically the leprechaun image had been transformed over the centuries. The authentic leprechauns were creatures of contradiction and complexity. They could be generous benefactors one day and vengeful tricksters the next, depending on circumstances and the behavior of those they encountered. They valued honesty, courage, and respect above all else, but they had little patience for greed, arrogance, or cruelty. Their tests and challenges were designed not to harm humans, but to help them grow and develop better character, though the methods they employed could be harsh by modern standards. In traditional Irish culture, leprechauns served an important social function as arbiters of moral behavior. Stories about encounters with these beings often carried implicit messages about proper conduct and the consequences of various actions. Children who heard these tales learned important lessons about treating others with kindness, approaching strangers with caution, and understanding that appearances could be deceiving. The leprechauns were teachers as much as they were tricksters, using their supernatural abilities to impart wisdom that would serve their students throughout their lives. The leprechauns were also closely associated with the concept of hospitality, which held sacred significance in Irish culture. Travelers who showed proper respect and courtesy when staying in leprechaun territory might find their journey eased by supernatural assistance, while those who were rude or demanding could expect to become hopelessly lost or encounter a series of frustrating obstacles. These stories reinforce the importance of treating all beings, whether human or supernatural, with dignity and respect. The decline of belief in leprechauns paralleled broader changes in Irish society during the modern era. As rural communities gave way to urban development, as traditional occupations were replaced by industrial employment, and as scientific rationalism challenged supernatural worldviews, the leprechauns gradually retreated from active participation in human affairs. The last genuine sightings and encounters were reported in the early decades of the 20th century, though isolated rural communities continued to maintain leprechaun traditions somewhat longer. Modern attempts to revive authentic leprechaun lore face significant challenges. Centuries of cultural suppression and commercial exploitation have obscured the original stories to such an extent that separating fact from fiction requires extensive research and careful analysis. Many of the oldest and most detailed accounts exist only in Irish Gaelic texts that few people can read today, while oral traditions have been diluted by generations of retelling and cross-contamination with popular culture references. Nevertheless, the effort to preserve and understand authentic leprechaun folklore continues, driven by recognition that these stories represent valuable insights into Irish history, culture, and worldview. The leprechauns were never just mythical beings, they were embodiments of Irish values and perspectives. Complex characters that reflected the hopes, fears, and wisdom of the people who created and maintained their stories across centuries of social change and cultural upheaval. The leprechauns also represent something universal about human nature and our relationship with the unknown. Their stories explore themes that resonate across cultures and time periods, questions about how we treat others, how we respond to opportunities and challenges, and how we balance self-interest with broader social responsibilities. In this sense, the leprechauns transcend their specific cultural origins to become symbols of the eternal human struggle to understand our place in a complex and often mysterious world. As we consider the future of leprechaun lore, we face a choice between continuing the commercialized trivialization of these mythical beings or working to restore understanding of their authentic nature and cultural significance. The sanitized leprechauns of popular culture certainly have their place as entertaining characters and cultural symbols, but they should not be allowed to completely eclipse the rich and meaningful traditions from which they emerged. The real leprechauns were guardians in the truest sense, protectors of ancient wisdom and timeless values who challenged humans to be better than they were. They embodied the Irish understanding that the supernatural world was not separate from everyday life, but intimately connected to it, influencing human affairs in ways both subtle and profound. Their tricks and tests were not random acts of mischief, but carefully designed lessons that helped mortals develop the strength, wisdom, and character needed to navigate an uncertain world. Today, as we face our own challenges and uncertainties, perhaps we need the leprechauns more than ever. Not the cheerful mascots of commercial culture, but the wise and demanding teachers of traditional folklore, beings who refused to accept mediocrity and challenged everyone they met to reach their full potential. Their legacy reminds us that true treasure is not gold or material wealth, but the knowledge, wisdom, and character we develop through facing life's challenges with courage and integrity. The story of the leprechauns is ultimately a story about transformation and survival. These mythical beings have endured for over 1,000 years, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential nature as guardians and teachers. They have survived religious persecution, cultural suppression, and commercial exploitation, emerging in each era in forms appropriate to their times while preserving the core wisdom that makes them valuable to human understanding. As we conclude this journey through leprechaun history and tradition, remember that myths and folklore are never just entertainment. They are repositories of human wisdom, collections of insights about life, relationships, and the challenges we all face. The leprechauns, in their authentic form, offer us guidance about how to live with honor, how to treat others with respect, and how to find meaning and purpose in our daily lives. The next time you see a commercialized leprechaun image, whether on a cereal box or in a movie, take a moment to remember the rich and complex tradition it represents. Behind that simplified symbol lies centuries of human imagination, cultural development, and spiritual insight. The real leprechauns may have retreated from our modern world, but their lessons remain as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago in the misty hills and valleys of ancient Ireland. So, what do you think? Are you ready to look beyond the stereotype and discover the authentic leprechauns of Irish tradition? Let me know in the comments what aspect of leprechaun lore surprised you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten stories behind the myths we think we know. Until next time, keep exploring the shadows where the real magic lives.